Good evening. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee. Director Gay Jones will not be able to make it today, so I will attempt to take the first chair here. So I'd like to have you call the order, please.
Yes. Director Stark,
Here.
Director Clark, and Director Weber. Thank you very much.
All right, now that we're ready to roll, there's a public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within the committee's scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Any speakers?
I have no speaker cards. If there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak, please raise your hand or come up to the podium. And anyone online wishing to speak, please use the raise your hand feature. No public comments. Thank you.
Hearing none, we'll move along. We'll move to consent items. First, we have to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Correct.
I so move.
Second. We have a first and a second, or a move in a second.
Great. Director Clark. Director Stark.
Aye.
Director Weber.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Very good. Now we have presentation items. We have two items this evening. The first will be fiscal year 2025-26 capital improvement program plan by Aaron Castleberry. Hi.
Marnie, do I need to move this at all?
Yes, you will need to.
Greetings all.
Thank you.
Your favorite presentation of the year has arrived. Just kidding, Dave. I am happy to be bringing you our capital improvement plan for fiscal year 25-26 through fiscal year 29-30. There it is. As you know, the purpose of our CIP is to memorialize our capital needs so that we can efficiently and transparently develop and support the physical infrastructure of the district. And the CIP is one component of our strategic planning framework, which you are all very familiar with. The outputs of the CIP go right into the financial management processes. The development of the CIP is a coordinated planning effort across all divisions, and that process is generally represented here. Projects are submitted by division managers in response to various planning documents. They are either proposed as a one-year ask or a 5-year projection. Those are rolled up into our CIP, and then that is reviewed, evaluated, and prioritized by the CIP committee, and then also by the executive team. We prepare a recommendation and we bring that to the board. In April, you'll remember we gave our first presentation to you on the fiscal year 25-26 CIP, which reflected just a summary of everything that had been submitted. At that point, we had just finished our committee review and we were beginning to prepare the financing plan for review by the executive team. So since our last update, we have completed the financing plan in coordination with the preliminary budget preparation, and the proposed CIP is being presented here to this committee in advance of our presentation to the full board next month for consideration and approval. That'll be alongside the preliminary budget as well. As is our practice, we will also prepare a final budget version of the CIP to reflect any changes that need to be adjusted between now and when we adopt final budget in September. There were a few minor adjustments made to projects since our last presentation in April, but the 5-year projection has remained the same at $350 million. We've also shown here how that total 5-year projection is broken down by project type. So there were a little bit of variation here, but overall still holding steady at $350 million. The total number of projects submitted for consideration, if you remember, was 69 projects, totaling $165.4 million to be spent over multiple fiscal years. 58 of those projects were brand new requests and made up 72% of the total funding requested. And 11 of those projects were projects that had been approved in a prior fiscal year and are still in progress. So those are being carried over into the new fiscal year. Those carryover projects made up 28% of the total funding requested. Of the 69 projects submitted for fiscal year 25-26, 46 are being recommended for funding in fiscal year 25-26. The requested appropriation for those projects, for all 69 projects, was $95.2 million. And the recommended appropriation for the 46 recommended projects is $109 million. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is the recommended appropriation more than the requested appropriation? This is because we are actually recommending some additional supplemental funding for specific apparatus projects, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. 46 million of the 109 million is being recommended to fund the carryover projects, while 33 million is recommended to fund new projects, and then that's supplemented with an additional 30 million. So we'll get into these. We'll talk about the carryover projects first. They make up 38.3 million. 46 million of the recommended funding. They were prioritized above the new projects because obviously they are already in progress and they were already approved in a prior fiscal year. We have 31.1 million in new construction projects that are ongoing, 12.2 million in ongoing apparatus and equipment replacement projects that are in progress. They've been ordered, just not received yet. 2.4 million in a land acquisition project for Grant Line 220, and 260,000 for a couple of frontage improvement projects at 2 of our stations. 35 new projects are being recommended for approval with a fiscal year 25-26 appropriation totaling 63 million. These projects include 56.5 million for apparatus and equipment projects, 4.6 million for new construction projects, 1 million for facilities repair and replacement projects, and 891,000 for PPE acquisition and replacement projects. The total appropriation of 63 million includes that supplemental funding for the 9 specific apparatus and equipment projects that are listed here. That is to represent 3 years worth of funding for these particular apparatus so that we can front load the ordering in order to gain some pricing and delivery timeline advantages with the manufacturer. So we're hoping that by being able to guarantee a certain number on the contract with the manufacturer, we can get some advantages on our delivery timelines and some pricing. So instead of taking those 1 year at a time, we front loaded 3 years into the first year so that we can move forward with those. The CIP budget for the 46 recommended projects totals 109 million. And as you know, it's funded through contributions from a mixture of fund sources, with the largest portion this year now coming from our Measure O fund, totaling 81.6 million. The Special Projects Fund and the Development Impact Fee Fund will contribute over 12 million each, while the General Fund will contribute about 2 million and the Capital Facilities Fund just under 200,000. 23 of the 69 submitted projects are not included in the proposed fiscal year 25-26 budget, resulting in a total unfunded need of 14.9 million. You can see that broken down here. It includes 6 million in apparatus and equipment replacement projects, 4.8 in new apparatus and equipment acquisitions, 1.7 million in facilities enhancement projects, and 2.4 million in PPE acquisition projects. These 23 unfunded projects are projects that were ranked as tier 2 or 3 projects in the project evaluation process. This ranking is based on a variety of factors, with this year particularly timing and staff capacity being the driving factors in our evaluation. As you know, we're recommending a lot more projects in our CIP this year. And so we had to sort of evaluate what we were really going to be able to accomplish in a 1-year period of time. So that was one of the biggest driving factors in how we prioritize the projects this year. There were some projects identified that we would like to ultimately fund through Measure O, but we've deferred that approval, that recommended approval, until we bring our bond auditor on board and confirm whether the projects would be considered an eligible use. If we find them to be eligible, which we believe that they are, but we want to confirm that, it would be our intent to fund these projects. So we would bring that back to the board for approval once we can confirm that. Generally speaking, those projects are categorized as Tier 2 projects here. You can see that list of projects here. Similarly, the Tier 3 projects, while also recognized as needs, again, we're going to push these off and they'll be reevaluated for future consideration, probably in a subsequent fiscal year. As I previously mentioned, the CIP will be presented to the full board in June next month for consideration and adoption. We also plan to submit, as I said, the revised one for board approval in September alongside final budget to account for any adjustments. And that ends my presentation tonight. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
I do not.
Yeah. As far as this front loading, equipment and parts and all that kind of stuff, do we have any kind of concerns about supply lines and all that kind of stuff going on right now? And
yeah, we're definitely mindful of that, which is also why we don't want to delay those purchases.
Mhm.
I think what we're intending to do, I don't know if Shay has additional information, but what we're intending to do is be able to contractually obligate with the manufacturer a total number. For example, Type 1 engines, we need 5 per year for the next 3 years. Instead of doing 5, 5, and 5, we want to guarantee 15. So then we'll be able to work with manufacturer and have a little leverage on saying, we'd like this many delivered by this date, this many delivered by this date, and gain some pricing advantages there. So that's another reason why we've decided to front load some of these apparatus purchases, is in consideration of potential supply line issues.
yeah, because right now
Yep.
because of a lot of our
A little
parts,
unknown.
a lot of our parts come from maybe Mexico, Canada, and whatnot, and
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
Shay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hopefully I captured that correctly.
That was my concern. Yeah. Okay.
Very good. We appreciate all the hard work.
Great. Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to our second presentation, the fiscal year 2025-26 preliminary budget.
Our favorite.
The favorite. CFO Dave O'Toole.
I will try not to disappoint. Good evening, Mr. Chair, directors, Fire Chief House, colleagues, and members of the public. I'm Dave O'Toole, Chief Financial Officer. I'll be presenting the 25-26 preliminary budget. Let's see, for tonight's presentation, we use comparisons throughout the presentation, and that will be to the mid-year budget. It's our most recent adopted budget, which of course wasn't that long ago, just 3 months ago or 2 months ago. What you'll hear tonight is that a transfer from the general fund reserve is again anticipated. The general fund reserve will dip below 10% as of the preliminary budget. The district will also fund 10 new positions, including positions associated with Measure O and positions associated with the service delivery plan. You'll also hear about slowing EMS transport growth and forecasted property tax revenues and persistently high constant staffing costs contributing to the costs and the imbalance between general fund. But the district is not alone in this budget dilemma. I'm sure you're all aware there are other local agencies have already reported. Just a few numbers. The city of Oakland faces an $89 million shortfall. City of San Francisco, $274 million. Sacramento here, the latest is 66 million. And Sacramento County also recently reported losing 26 million in federal funds, which is going to hurt their bottom line, of course, too. So with that sobering start, I'm going to move us onto the agenda. So for tonight, we'll of course be, I'm going to provide an overview of funds, of all funds. So you can you'll be able to see the picture there at a high level. And then we'll turn to general fund revenues and expenditures, followed by information on capital outlay, complementing what Aaron Castleberry just presented with the infusion of Measure O funds, making a big difference there. And then we'll look at the long-term forecast, which will be covering the years 25-26 to 29-30, which is a 5-year look. And then as usual, we'll have a summary and comments. So this next slide is your preliminary budget overview. What I use to answer the most common questions of how big is your budget and how big is your reserve. And that is displayed here. Let's see, this budget includes changes between mid-year and preliminary again. So we're using the mid-year as a reference. And the pink box below is your general fund reserve information. So starting at the top left box, general fund, preliminary budget revenues are anticipated to be nearly 336 million, expenditures just slightly over 336 million. So very close together. Comparing from mid-year, you can see that mid-year general fund revenues rose 10.4 million and expenditures rose 8.3 million. The difference there as you continue down is in the transfers, where the transfers out, these are transfers from the general fund to another fund, in this case, the capital facilities fund, are reduce the balances by 3.8 million. So you put all that together under that preliminary column and you get the general fund shortfall of 4.3 million. For the last few years, your forecasts have shown that property tax is our main revenue source, would stop growing at a breakneck pace and sort of start to come down. Just for reference, in 22-23, we are projecting, we saw property tax growth year over year go up 7.8%. The year after that, it was 5.7%. In 24-25, the current year, it's 5%. And then the year after, in 26-27, we expect it to be 4%. So still revenue growth, but just significantly less than what we've had seen recently. And turning just as it relates to the reserve, you can see there in the pinkish box, the reserve is declining from 11.8% to 9.8%, a difference of about 4 million, as 4.3 million. And you'll hear me say this again later, but I want to just put it out early on, is that this is the preliminary budget. And by definition, it is preliminary. There are pieces that we will learn over the summer after fiscal year ends that we'll be able to include in the final. So typically, been around, you've seen this before, typically the picture improves in final because we have savings that gets carried over. I just don't have that information right now. That's why it's called the preliminary budget. And I'll give you the final after the fiscal year ends, and I can present the more complete picture. Before I leave the slide, that all funds box to the right. So that's showing everything. Interestingly, your expenditures for the first time ever, you look at the expenditures for the district, they've tipped over 400 million. We're actually at 466 million. Big part of that is showing expenditures from Measure O. So the budget took sort of a leap in size if expenditures is your measure. And then the transfers in went from 17 million at mid-year to 150 million. That's largely receiving in those Measure O proceeds, which we'll hear about later in the full board meeting. And then the change in fund balance increases by almost 40 million. So that's the big picture of the general fund reserve, and then all funds. This next slide looks at the funds in particular. It's arranged with the eight funds across the top there. And then the shaded lines, the top shaded line shows you what the balance was of the fund. We expect the balance of the fund to be on July 1. And then over the course of the year, and those unshaded lines, the activity going on in those funds. And then at the end, what we expect it to be. So if you look at general fund, these are the numbers we just went over. We start with a $37.5 million reserve. Series of expenditures and revenues and transfers ends up reducing the reserve by 4.3 million. You get a $33.2 million reserve. Kind of follow that logic through. The capital facilities fund won't have any balance in the beginning. We'll have some expenditures, we'll have some transfers in, including those from the general fund, and we'll end up with a balance of 600,000 or so. Leased properties fund, we're largely kind of accruing revenues in that fund. There are some expenditures with 700,000, but it'll be a little bit larger at the end of it. The grant fund, we expect to receive around 4.5 million and spend all of it. You see there's a $3 balance, just demonstrating how carefully we monitor our budget there. $3 balance at the end, projected at the end of that year. The development impact fees fund, we have a balance in that. We expect to spend all of it. And that would include things like the Grant Line 220 land purchase, some of it spent on Zinfandel Training Center and the Station 67 build out. The two funds after that, Measure O Debt Service Fund and Measure O Building Fund, are new, of course. The debt service fund is as it expects, like once the bonds are issued, we will need to start to pay them off starting next year. And so that amount there, that expenditure is shown there, about around 10 million. And then the Measure O Building Fund is showing you under the expenditure line, we expect to spend about almost 90 million from that fund, and then we'll receive in that 158 million. That's the amount that of debt we plan to issue in July. So, and then the Special Projects Fund is for the Zinfandel Training Center. We have a balance of 12.6, still expecting to spend it all next year. So that is a total fund, looking at all the funds, what they will start and end like in the fiscal year. All right, so turning from all those funds to just the general fund, we've got a few slides on the revenues and the expenditures. So to kind of rehash some information I just covered, the revenue is just under 336 million. It's up by 10.4 million over the mid-year, and property taxes are up by 9 million. This will be the 13th consecutive year of property tax growth and 15th consecutive year of total revenue growth, basically since the Great Recession. Looking at the charges for services, the estimate is 107.4 million, which is 3.6 million over mid-year. CRD fees expect to climb slightly by 500,000. EMS fees, a modest growth of 2.4 million based on transports. And PPGMT will increase about 3.3 million. And then voluntary rate range program will decline about 900,000. Now, one thing I want to note here is finance is no longer using what we call the IGT fund, and we're just moving it. All these previous presentations, I report that we move that money from the IGT fund to the general fund. It was originally set up as a separate fund to make it more discreet there and kind of monitor it closely. We can still do that. It's just that it becomes easier from a finance perspective to ensure the transfers are more timely by putting it in the general fund. So there is a line item still in the budget where you can find voluntary rate range program and in the public and the PPGMT program. So it's still there. We just moved it over to the general fund. And then and that last bullet, net of formerly IGT categorized revenue transferred to the general fund is 27.2 million, approximately 500,000 more than we had in the mid-year budget. So that's the big picture revenue. Shifting over to expenditures, again, there's that 336.3 million again, up by 8.2 million over the prior year. The labor budget, which includes both compensation and benefits, will reach 271 million. It's up 2.2%. The budget adds 10 positions. Those positions shown there are 6 firefighters, 1 shop assistant, 1 helicopter mechanic, 1 warehouse supervisor, and then 1 facilities tech. The 25-26 cost of those positions is about 940,000, and that's partially because the firefighters, as shown there, would not graduate and be on the street until 5/1/26, till May 1, 2026. Also, as shown there, common question is how much is labor as a share of general fund revenues? It's now 80.6. So it's actually declined a little bit since mid-year. Service and supplies will be 60.2 million, up 2 million or 3.4%. Again, we're bringing over the VRP and the PPGMT from the IGT fund to the general fund. We brought over the expenditures as well. So that's also, service and supplies appears to climb, but that's only because we're adding about 15 million of VRP and PPGMT costs as well that were simply shown in another fund previously. So the real increase is about 2 million. Digging down into the labor side of expenditures, the compensation, which of course includes wages, incentives, paramedic incentive, education, longevity, et cetera, and constant staffing, auto class pay, sick leave buybacks, that all falls under compensation. That's 152.1 million. about 2.1% more than mid-year. Wages are $4.3 million higher. And there is no wage increase built into this year under the current MOU. There is no, that's not included. And then constant staffing over time is $2.6 million lower than last year. That decrease is largely based on building up the pool and being able to having a fuller pool and be able to reduce constant staffing costs. Let's see. Incentive pays for EMT, paramedic, et cetera, are up 1.1 million. The employee wellness incentive is still there at 3.1 million. Total benefits are 119 million, up 2.3%. That includes increased CalPERS pension contributions of 6.7 million, increased employee medical costs of 1.8 million, and as shown there, decreased workers' compensation costs of 582,000. That estimating assumes that workers' comp costs will be higher than our historical baseline average, but we won't see the individual case spikes we saw early this current fiscal year. Next, looking at the service and supply side of expenditures, there's just some top line. Some of the more noticeable changes, I guess, the larger changes are we had a $457,000 increase in liability and property insurance, computer services and licensing up 282,000. Dispatch services, there was a new contract was negotiated that added 370,000 there. We also had some deductions, 355,000 in fire equipment servicing and 150,000 for safety and clothing supplies. Here's the capital outlay summary. The total spending 111.9 million in capital outlay. This slide, capital outlay is we're capturing all the spending from general fund, capital facilities fund, development impact fees fund, the special projects fund, and of course Measure O. Note that the total there 111.9 is slightly higher than the CIP because some of the capital outlay projects don't qualify as CIP. There's a $50,000 threshold for it to qualify as a CIP. So the numbers don't exactly tie, but they're pretty close. Everything Measure O is CIP. So that list there of Measure O projects is also in the CIP, of course. Just some of the standouts, some of the higher dollar ones are the 67 build out for 7 million. Several station expansions, relocation for 42. Let's see, 25 ambulance replacements, 9.2 million, 15 type 1 engine replacements, 19.7 million. So really just unprecedented spending on apparatus and our stations, thanks to Measure O. Noted there too are just some other spending from other accounts, the development impact fees fund. I mentioned those before for Grant Line 220 acquisition, Zinfandel Training Center, and the Capital Facilities Fund is a small balance of less than 400,000. So the next two slides are the long-term forecasts. I mentioned that when I started. So this is kind of just looking at looking forward and trying to provide you a window into what this might look like. I wanted to give you the assumptions up front. So we used our property tax consultants' most recent projections through 2030. They give us, here's your 5-year, what we think your increases are going to be. They're all around or just under 4%. So I kind of mentioned that the growth has come down over the last few years, and now that's kind of flatlining around 4%. The forecast also incorporates the current wage costs adjusted annually to reflect natural growth. So that would be kind of step increases and that kind of thing, where we just see wages kind of creep up on their own. It's about 2%. So we assume that going forward as well. There's no compensation or staff increases assumed. This is, I guess I would consider this to be sort of an austerity budget in the sense that when it comes to staffing and compensation, we're not assuming any changes going forward in this forecast. Let's see, most current PPG and VRP revenue estimates are assumed just plus 2% annually. Pension costs are increased at the CalPERS' projection rate. They have a forecast that has certain rates. I just applied it to our model. Annual CPI index growth is 3.2% through the forecast. So just holding that flat, not anticipating any big changes there. Maybe worth noting that the Chairman Powell's last meeting in early this month, he mentioned he made no changes, but he mentioned maybe 2 to 4 rate cuts later this year. So, that could affect some things if they actually occur that would work to our overall benefit, but we can't really factor that in just yet. So here's the forecast. This is the table. As you can see, the amount of general fund reserves, the blue column is mostly climbing. There's a little bit of a dip in 28, 29 relative to 27, 28, but it's generally climbing just mainly at the rate that the expenditures are growing to. So let's see. So the gain in reserve ratio, the green line is climbing only gradually with a dip in 28, 29. The red line is the 15% reserve marker. So you can kind of see where we would be relative to that 15%. Some things to keep in mind. I want to return to this because this information will change at final, is that this is preliminary. So at final, we'll carry over, we'll know what the carryover savings and new expenditures are and give you an updated picture in a few months. The 5-year forecast shows reserve borrowing discontinuing, which means no more dips into the reserve, although there could be a small one of 400,000 in 28, 29. Other than that, no significant ones. Some of the big variables that we're watching closely, just what's going on in the outside the district, is federal funding and Medicaid. There were some reductions announced over the last couple of days. This isn't the big, beautiful bill. There are some reductions there. I reached out to our consultant today on that, and it's basically too soon to say whether or not that's going to affect these programs. So I don't have any good news or any good or bad news on that for you. We're just going to have to watch it closely. Incidentally, it'll go to the Senate, and then maybe it gets reconciled in August. So possibly I'd be able to come back at final and say, this is the impact. Hopefully there's no impact, but I'll be able to, I think I'll have a better sense there. Possibly on the positive side that I want the committee to be aware of as well, is that the PBGMT, if you recall, we had an add-on rate increase effective to January 1, 2024. That was announced in January of 2025. So it resulted in a significant surge of, I think it's about $3.5 million in PBGMT revenues. Well, the same request was made to the federal Centers of Medicaid Services again this year for a larger amount. And, if that were to come through, that would be about a $7 million increase to our budget. And we wouldn't know about it, though, until January of 2026. It would be a mid-year change. So it's a ways off, and definitely not including that in any sort of forecast, but it is a sizable change, and it's out in public. So I wanted just to make that clear to you that could come to. With that, I think using the general fund reserves, I do intend that to be a short-term solution while longer-term strategies are identified and implemented. Hear more about that at final or whenever you'd like to talk more about that. The goal here is balance and careful planning. Let's see, not letting a pendulum swing one way or another, just try to be methodical in our approach with these trends that we're seeing here. Okay, so with that, your budget summary, kind of just recapping what I just went over. The preliminary budget includes a reduction of the general fund reserve balance by 4.3 million to 33.2 million. What that does percentage-wise is reduce the reserve from 11.8 to 9.8%. That general fund growth is budgeted 3.2% higher than prior year. On the expenditure side, including transfers out, budgeted at 2.5% higher than prior year. PBGMT add a net 27.2 million to the district's budget, so still a really substantial part of our budget. And finally, that 5-year forecast shows reserve borrowing likely ending, and modest property tax growth will lead to a gradual increase in general fund reserve amount with little gain in reserve share, subject to significant changes like property tax trends and labor costs and that kind of thing. With that concludes my presentation, and I'll be, with your approval, I will take this forward to the Board of Directors on June 12th and take your questions.
Thank you. Questions?
So our labor costs right now are around 8.6% of general. It's usually around what? 84, 85?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, 84, okay. Got it. That's just wanted to around then.
Yeah, 84.5% at mid-year. Yeah, but you got it.
So first of all, you had presented last budget that we had saved roughly 32% in work comp. We saw a decrease in that.
Mhm.
And now you're saying that there's a 10% decrease. That's on top of the 32?
Well, let's see, at mid-year, we increased the workers' comp spending from,
Oh, I thought it was the other way around. It was 32% was your number.
I think it was, we increased it about $1.5 million. Maybe that was the size of the increase, but it
But-
seems a little high.
But we're now decreasing by 10%?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Also, it wasn't in this presentation, but what you sent us to review,
Mhm.
cost savings, how we're going to handle this stuff in the future. Just hear this. I am opposed to brownouts 100%. So squeeze every penny, do whatever you can. I don't want any brownouts. If we have to bump the squad, we have to bump the squad. But as far as browning out stations is not a good thing for me.
Understand.
There you go. Thank you.
I have to echo that. I don't want to see us doing any brownouts. I think it's really important that we maintain our reserve, but in light of the fact that we're ramping up for Measure O, I think it's prudent for us to front load it a little bit like we are with the funding for apparatus so that we can get this off and get the people ready in place to make it successful. And it's really great. I'm new, so I am from Oakland, and you guys are doing it better than every place else. So we're really blessed to have this and a lot of great work. Thank you.
When are you going to stop playing that card?
With that,
Dave, thank you.
that is the end of our presentations. Our next meeting is June 26th. And with that, we are adjourned.